With the release of Phrolovawuwa in the version 2.5 update, we also got access to our very first 3-piece Sonata set within the game, being the Dream of the Lost set. So I wanted to talk a bit about how much potential 3-piece sets have, and how I believe they might be able to impact the game in the future. 3-piece sets are an incredibly unique idea in my opinion. I was actually pretty excited when I first saw that the Dream of the Lost set would be a 3-piece set, because I believe that one of the biggest positives that this brings into the game is more build diversity for our characters. We used to just be limited to 5-piece sets. There was not a single character in which a 2-piece combination was actually best in slot, or even a remotely close option to the regular 5-piece echo sets. So the 2-piece effect on its own brought relatively little value. Obviously, 2-piece effects were always made in a way to where they synergized with the 5-piece effect, so you'd never really run a 2-piece combination. You'd always want to just go straight up for the 5-piece set. But the introduction of 3-piece sets gives us more flexibility in this regard, and also adds more value to the 2 pieces of individual sets. For example, for Frosty Resolve, its 2-piece gives skill damage bonus, but the 5-piece effect also gives glacio damage bonus, meaning that it was always just going to end up being a Carlotta set. But because Dream of the Lost is a 3-piece, and Phrolova does primarily skill damage, 2-piece Frosty Resolve ended up being a pretty viable alternative on Phrolova if you didn't have a 2-piece Havoc damage or a 2-piece attack percent ready. So ultimately, Frosty Resolve managed to get a new niche for being a viable 2-piece on Phrolova. It's actually less than 30% worse than just running Midnight Veil or Havoc Eclipse. So the addition of the 3-piece set gives additional value to certain 2-piece sets because the 2-piece sets will finally have an actual reason to exist. This is a pretty positive change in my opinion, because now we'll see the resurgence of old sets simply because the 2-piece is something that a new character can use whose best in slot set ended up being a 3-piece. Another effect of the 3-piece set would be the fact that now we're getting more forms of build diversity. Because as I said before, now 2-piece sets will start actually gaining value because of their 2-piece, but we'll also start seeing more viable primary echo slots. One issue that the primary echo system always faced is that you always felt incredibly restricted to only the echoes of the best in slot set of the character. And for almost every single echo in question, the primary echo would always end up being a 4-cost, because they always had their own inherent buffs. For example, if you're building Carlotta, you're gonna want to end up running the Frosty Resolve set, which means your only options for 4 costs are Sentry Construct and Nightmare Lamp Illumin. However, with the addition of 3-piece sets, this ends up becoming a lot more flexible. We might currently only have access to the Dream of the Lost 3-piece set, but if we do get another Dream of the Lost user in the future, who isn't a Havoc damage dealer, we can see them actually using a primary echo from a different set. For example, if there is a Dream of the Lost user who ends up being, I don't know, a fusion character, we'll be able to run the regular Inferno Rider because the 2-piece of Molten Rift will still give us 10% fusion damage bonus, which means that you're able to run more primary echoes on a character, and I think that is an incredibly unique way to make builds more diverse. We have plenty of echoes that simply have the same buff just on a different set. Dragon of Dirge and regular Inferno Rider both give basic attack damage and fusion damage bonus, but because they're on different sets, they're not as interchangeable. Obviously, the 2-piece effects of these sets are still different, so I'm not saying it would be the exact same as usual, but I believe that the ability to pull primary echoes from 2 different sets and not be worried about having less Sonata effects is incredibly good for build diversity. Additionally, there is also the fact that 3-piece sets are most likely a lot easier for Kuro to make. I'm not gonna say that 5-piece sets are that hard to make. The sets themselves should be relatively easy to make, considering that it is basically just programming effects. But for a regular 5-piece effect, you simply need more echoes. Now what do I mean with this? When you have a 5-piece set effect, obviously you're expecting players to put, well, 5 unique echoes on their build. So you need a higher variety of different echoes on a set, which often requires making new enemies with new unique echo skills. And this is the part that might be actually pretty time consuming for Kuro games to do. Adding unique echoes and unique enemies isn't really an easy task, I imagine. especially if you're only doing it just so you can make a new set. But with the free-piece echoes, considering they seem to be primarily nightmare echoes, I would argue that it's a lot easier. Sure, you have to make new echo skills, because, well, the nightmare echoes don't have the same echo skills. But enemies themselves? You already have the enemies, you don't need to make new ones. All you have to make is simply nightmare variations of existing ones. Then just add like 1 or 2 echoes onto the new set that people are able to farm more in the overworld, and bam, you have a new free-piece set. So overall, a free-piece set effect should be relatively easy for Kuro games to make compared to a regular 5-piece. Now, why is this important? Well, from Kuro Games' perspective, they're most likely weighing the pros and cons behind making new Sonata sets. For example, let's say they're trying to buff an older character by making a new Sonata set, but they don't want to go through all the effort of making new echoes on this set. So ultimately, the new set never gets made. However, considering the fact that 3-piece sets are a lot easier to make than the regular 5-piece sets, it's probably a lot more likely for us to see a lot more 3-piece sets coming our way. And because we'll get more 3-piece sets, that's a lot more chances for older characters to receive buffs. The Dream of the Lost set probably was just an experiment to see if people's reception to the idea is positive. So they decided to make a set for a DPS that a lot of people would be forced to interact with, and thus they would be able to get a lot of feedback. So now we might be able to see new 3-piece sets dedicated to buffing older characters. When people think about buffing older characters, the primary way they see it is simply by just giving them new supports. But I believe that ways to buff them indirectly without making new characters are often superior and more well designed. For example, I was a really big fan of the idea of Nightmare Echoes back during the 2.0 update. It buffed a lot of older characters like Kalcharo, Shang Liao, and Changli by simply giving them better primary echoes to run on their build. So now with 3-piece sets, we might be seeing a new version of that. So in the future, we could see 3-piece sets that are dedicated to characters like Jinshi or Jien. Obviously, I'm not saying that they're bad now, and if that's the message you got from that, I don't know what to tell you. But if there ever comes a moment where these characters feel like they can't keep up anymore, Kuro has a really easy way to buff these characters that doesn't take them that much effort. So honestly, I believe that 3-piece sets have a ridiculous amount of potential to change Wuthering Waves for the better. Obviously, I don't think it's a perfect system. I believe that my primary issue, and the same thing for everyone else, is the fact that the Nightmare Nests have a limited amount of claims per day. The Nightmare Nests are a good idea, giving us the ability to farm echoes without spending any wave plates in an easy manner. But the fact that it's so incredibly limited makes it incredibly hard for you to build a character as soon as possible, and essentially adds yet another time gate into an already time-consuming process. But what do you think of the new 3-piece sets? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it helps me out a lot. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord server, which is linked in the description. I'm pretty active in there, so there's a pretty good chance I'll respond. If you just want to see more of me as a person, be sure to check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I primarily talk about Punishing Grey Raven, but I kinda just make videos about what I feel like. Well, that'll be all from me. Peace.